how can we get to the place where we don't diminish the action that leaders have, because leaders are people of action. We don't diminish that. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's like when action becomes the bias, you miss the reflective side. So you've got to be able to carry both of those things in tension moving forward. And for me, unless you have somebody to help assist in that, you'll run after one or maybe even the other.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
Okay, everyone, welcome to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Really excited to have everybody listening. And we're, I think at this point, almost halfway through or more through season 5 and having a lot of fun and cool conversations. And I'm really excited about this conversation. We usually plan our podcast a couple months in advance, and we set up the guests and we know who's going to be on, and they've been different things. But I met Nathan LaGrange, who's going to be on today. Just within the last month or two, was introduced and had a amazing conversation, and in a season where there's some things that I've been wrestling with that he shared and that I know other leaders are needing in the season they're in. Like, we just need to do this podcast episode and get it going. So, Nathan's part of Life Impact. He's going to share about what all that is. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. So Nathan, welcome, man. I'm excited we're doing this so fast.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate you getting me in before you have another baby. So let's cram.
Let's hope we can get through this fast recording without
let's talk about rest, but let's do it really fast so that you can go have a baby. Yep.
That's a little counterproductive. There's a lot of that would be kind of counterintuitive to hopefully where this conversation goes. That's funny. Well, cool, man. Well, hey, so why don't we start here? Why don't you give just a brief overview of Life Impact? Now, as a clarification, you guys are going to rebrand sometime in the next year, and then we're going to update the cover art for this podcast, and we'll update the title and stuff. And so just for everyone knowing, if they're watching in a year or listening in a year and they're like, who the heck is Life? That's what we're doing. But why don't you give us a couple minute overview of who you guys are, what you're doing, how you function, and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll peel back the layers from there. Yeah,
for sure. I think basically the biggest issue that we see right now with spiritual leaders is a lack of rest, is a lack of a safe space to go, a lack of a place to be in an encouraging environment, a lack of a transformative process that they can walk through with somebody, the lack of an opportunity to just peel away for a few days, let their hair down, feed themselves. I think with all of the COVID and all of the issues that are going on in our world, it's like it's exacerbated all the things that have always been there in the lives of leaders who are the ones who are bearing the brunt of a lot of this stuff. So we're watching unprecedented levels of anxiety and stress and overload and people on the wedge of burnout and being overwhelmed, et cetera. So it's like, is there an answer for this? Yes. And for us as believers, the answer is we have a hope in Jesus. We have, a faith that we can lean on, all those kind of things. But is there a practical way to engage in something? So Life Impact literally exists to see every Christian leader on every major continent given access and opportunity to be refreshed through rest. And for us, that's retreat, encouragement, safety, and transformation. So we like to say your rest is our mission. We have physical locations that we call oasis that are scattered all over the world, that are staffed by trained hosts who are going to offer you unprecedented levels of attentive hospitality, as well as like that professional coaching, and for a lot of missionaries and even a lot of leaders, some debriefing, a moment to unpack some stuff. So it's like most of our leaders are used to having to pour out. Well, when do they get poured into? That's what we offer. That's the spaces all over the world there. We kind of say it's like a sacred space with a sacred face. So it's the combination of the two. We look at a 3 to 5 or a 5 to 7 day, kind of be in the sweet spot. For some of our missionaries and our other leaders, maybe a little bit longer. It's good. For some other leaders, maybe a little bit shorter is effective as well. But kind of in that sweet spot of just saying, come be loved on. Literally, it's that picture of Jesus washing feet. Like, that's what we want to do for leaders. Give them space to just unload, be themselves, go play, retreat, relax, and be refreshed. So that's, I mean, for me, I'm like, if I can look around at the landscape and go, what is like one, you know, if the dike is overflowing, what's one hole that I could stick my finger in? It's like that one right there. If I could offer rest, could we actually change the legacy of our leaders? I think the answer is yes. I have never made a good decision tired. All of my really stupid, regrettable decisions have been made when I'm just smoked out. When I'm refreshed, when I'm renewed, it's like my perspective is different. I see things differently. Even the reality of the struggle that I'm in right now, maybe it doesn't go away, but it like diminishes in stature as I look, oh my gosh, there is a much bigger, beautiful kingdom to live into. So that's what we offer people all over the world. Pastors, missionaries, Christian leaders everywhere. Okay.
Yeah. So I was trying to keep up with you to take enough notes of all the things I was planning on talking about off of that. And I don't know if I could, if I could do it well.
I just fire hydranted you.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's start here. Just really quick. Practically, tactically, what does that look like? So someone might be listening thinking, so you got 1,000 of these? Are these missionaries? Are these couples? Are these one person? Are you have 5 of these? Are you just doing it? Can you just give us a little bit of like a scope of where you guys are at today? Obviously your vision is to grow and scale that. And that's something you guys can talk about, but give us just a little bit of scope of what that looks like today and how long it's been a thing, just so people have that as maybe a baseline.
Absolutely. So about 20 years ago, there was a missionary with the Navigators. Maybe some of your listeners will be familiar with the Navigators ministry. Actually, I think it's out there in Colorado where you are. He was coming back from work behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, covert stuff, hard stuff, difficult stuff. And literally got to a place in his own life where he could not get up out of the recliner. Like, he just couldn't move. He was done. And if you think back to 20 years ago, nobody was really talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was happening.
It was happening all over the place, but it was like no one was talking about it. We were, you know, not to be crass, but it's like we were killing ourselves for Jesus. We were in kingdom work and let's just do it till we die. And it's like, okay, A, that is theologically way off. And B, that's not the way Jesus did things when he was here on earth. That doesn't follow any of his rhythms. So I'm not 100% sure who we were following there, but we weren't following Jesus. So he came back from that and he started to kind of dream up, what if we could offer, you know, as he moved through a recovery process himself, he's like, what if we could offer this to other missionaries? He's like, I know I have men and women in our own organization that are experiencing the same thing. How can we offer some type of refreshing, some type of rest for men and women in missions work? So this was primarily birthed out of that kind of global worker type movement because they didn't have anywhere to go. You know, you're not going to send a newsletter to your constituency and be like, hey, we're struggling in marriage and our kids are giving us fits and I don't even know if I'm called to do this anymore. Like, will you now send us a donation? Like, that's not a good newsletter.
Can we just recognize that is probably like a minimum couple times a year thing for any human? Like, just to be in that spot, like how normal that is, and it's okay.
It happens. And we've somehow like superheroed these people beyond humanity. And so it's like, let them be human beings. So he dreamed up this idea and they started it actually in Bend, Oregon. So they're at Sun River, and expanded to another one in Slovakia. That became the first international thing. And now 20 years later, we've got 20 of these locations around the world. Most of them are staffed by either former pastors, former missionaries, or former business leaders who have been well-trained in coaching, who have debriefing skills, and who have an incredibly high degree of hospitality. So we like to say that we're on site with insight. We're not that weird people that are like all up in your grill and this is a weird experience. Like, we all know how to do this and we do it well. So there's enough space for you to kind of, if you need to connect with your spouse, your family in that kind of a context, it's wide open to do that. And then there's enough space to be intentional about, hey, let's walk through some things with you. Let's unpack what happened this last year. What happened to you, you know, with that board meeting, or man, that business that failed. And you're like, oh my gosh, is my whole life over? No, it's not. God's always got something beautiful in store, and he can take that struggle and do something amazing with it. I think I told you one of my favorite analogies in all that we get to do. And we actually have a video out on YouTube that I got to shoot in this glorious vineyard in Oregon.
Cool.
But I'm fascinated by grapes. Grapes fascinate me. The vineyard, it feels like it's this romantic place, and obviously you can go there and spend the day or whatever. But vines themselves are fascinating because if you give a vine too much sun, too much water, too much of anything, all you produce is leaves and flowers. It's super pretty to look at. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, that is really attractive. And I think sometimes in ministry, that's what we've done. We've like overdone some things to where there's just leaves and flowers and all this kind of stuff. Other kind of principles of this would be a grape farmer or a vintner would look at you and say, no, that's not how you grow good grapes. You actually grow them in not so great soil, not so great sun conditions. The irrigation can be spotty at best, but those vines have to go super deep into the soil in order to get the minerals and nutrients to produce the good fruit. So there's a saying that is struggling vines make great wines, but it takes somebody to come alongside of you to help you identify the struggle can produce beauty. The struggle can produce even better fruit. If you're just kind of stuck there unattended, you're not going to be able to sometimes come to that realization on your own. So our hosts gently walk people through. Yes, you've had this struggle. Yes, you've had this issue. Yes, you've had this come against you, but we can help see that through to transformation by letting you rest, refresh, get a different perspective, and then go launch back out into your kingdom calling. Like that's the beauty of what we do. So we get to do that, like I said, all over the world with highly trained staff, looking to expand because, as you know, the demand is absolutely overwhelming and the supply is woefully low. Yeah.
You made a comment earlier that like leaders aren't poured into. And I think most of us can maybe agree that that's true. My question is, I'm more thinking like, why, like, why is that the norm? Is it, and things my brain goes to is, okay, well, like to say this in humility, like leaders are kind of a special breed and there's not as many of them. And so it is kind of, if you're a leader in a space, it can be very hard to find someone who gets it. You kind of like look around and you're like, okay, well, I can open up to that person, but they only get a third of what I'm talking about. And I can open up to that person, they get a third. And so I'm not going to talk to 3 different people. That's going to be a waste of my time. And so who really gets it? And the amount of kind of situational awareness it takes, I mean, coaching skills, debriefing skills, like what you were talking about earlier, like that takes a special kind of, so if you just look at the human race as a filter, and again, I'm probably going to get canceled for saying stuff like this. That's fine, whatever.
Yes.
But if you look at the human race as a culture and you like just anything, I mean, you could do this with like a great chef. Like you look at the human race as a culture and you take who has a good taste buds. All right, well, that limits a lot of people. They can't even tell the difference, And so in general, when you look at a skill set, you start to limit it. And this skill set isn't necessarily something that totally can be taught. It kind of can be, but it's also just like kind of a unique thing. So overarchingly, why aren't leaders being poured into? In your opinion, we can open that up. And like what are your thoughts on where that comes from?
There's a couple of things that jump into my mind right away. One is perception. If you're a leader, you don't have any problems because you're used to giving the answers. So that perception can run 2 different ways. That can run with both those you lead or your audience or your business constituency. It doesn't matter. So there's a perception that, oh, hey, Ryan's the go-to guy. He's always got answers. He helps solve my problems. I don't often think that he has problems of his own. The other flip side of that is maybe a humility issue. If I continue to look at Ryan like that, Ryan may begin to think, I don't have any problems. I do have all the answers. I've got all this figured out. And all of a sudden, this pride kind of swells up in the midst of all of the things that are really running through your life. You start to feel a bit ashamed. And now that just compounds and you're like, I am so far down the rabbit hole. I don't even know who to talk to anymore. I put on this public persona. Everybody has this perception of how great I am. And if I tell them I really struggle with XYZ, or wow, my spouse and I don't have the greatest relationship, or man, my kids, they really don't even like me anymore. Like all of a sudden, if you say that, it's like the perception now gets diminished, and it takes a great deal of humility to admit I need help. Help becomes this like, why don't we ask for help? I mean, I'm the kind of guy that sometimes my car is jacked up. All I got to do is take it to a mechanic. But I pause and I'm like, well, hopefully it'll iron itself out. What kind of thinking is that? Or I'll tinker around with it. I'll go on YouTube and I'll figure it out myself. I am zero mechanic skills in any way, shape, or form. And yet I think I can do that. And it takes just a bit of humility to go, I can't. Other people have been gifted to be able to do this.
Yeah.
I can go now and I can send, we're using car analogies, but it's like with our own heart, our own mind, our own soul, it's like, I need help. Like you're about to have child number 2. Are you supposed to be an expert in having 2 kids? No. Like you can read all the books, you can do all the stuff, but it's like a year down the road when you're like, dear God, help me. How do I manage this? Well, it takes some humility to go, I just need help. Well, when you're a leader, it's like the perception is there that you don't need help, or you've built that up yourself. And now all of a sudden your whole world is crumbling down and you don't know who to reach out to.
Yeah, totally. So two kind of spin-offs of that. I'm gonna go with the further one and we'll come back to the other one if I can even remember what it is. Like, if you have if neither of those are true, if you're not built up with pride, the humility, and if you
sure.
That stuff's not there. Finding access, accessing those people is tough, because like I think there's a lot of good, and I'm gonna wear the Christian hat for a minute. Like, sure. I think there's a lot of good biblical Christian counselors with a lot of specialties out there for counseling. I think that's something we've gotten better at, and like supply and demand feels pretty appropriate there. Like I think if a friend came to me in Denver, was like, hey, I think I'd know where to point them and give them like 5 referrals. Yep. Like I feel pretty good about that. I think we've gotten there. I don't think we've fully gotten there in terms of the supply of like really good, like executive coach, spiritual, and maybe I'm not even gonna say executive coach. I think it's almost like a spiritual director kind of thing, because it can't just be raw performance management, executive coaching, like whatever, take this assessment, you're good. I think that could be helpful. And it can't just be counseling. And it needs a layer of pretty, most of the time, probably some in-depth theological, like wrestling that people have. Like someone who's really going through that's thought about those things is like, no, there's like a weighty thing to this, and I need someone who can like talk to it. So I think if someone those 2 pathways you laid out, if they're not struggling with one of those and they're there, and that'll get to my second point later on if we ever get there.
Yeah.
What's with the supply? Like, why is that so hard? I mean, obviously you're saying like, hey, you're not saying we've cracked the code, but you're saying, hey, we're trying really hard.
We're trying. But
even you mentioned earlier, the demand for what's needed out there and the amount of people you have doing that are very small. So yeah, why, what's missing there?
I think some of it is just recognition. So when you talk about Christian counseling, I think we've really gotten better at that. I would say within the last couple of decades. We went into ministry 20 plus years ago. Nobody was talking about this. If you did say, hey, I'm going to a counselor, it was like immediately like, wow, you're a terrible
moral failure.
Like,
if you're going to a counselor, that's moral failure as a pastor, probably. Yeah.
You've embezzled or you slept around, whatever it was that you did. Like the perception was terrible in that case. But I think it's recognition from leaders that maybe they need to be in a space where they can be asked deeper questions. I think sometimes we send leaders off to XYZ conference, or we do this kind of thing, and it becomes just more informational type stuff, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. Like there's great stuff out there. It's incredible. But I think when you get a leader, and I'll give this example just last week, our home is not an official oasis because we're busy serving the organization as a whole and trying to increase its visibility, et cetera. But we had a business leader here last week, gentleman's in his late 50s, early 60s, runs multi-million-dollar businesses. He had really never rested for multiple days in a row. And to come to a space that was specific for him, that could have this attentive hospitality, like he was like just mind blown, soul blown by, wow, my ability to serve now as a leader has been upped because I actually took the time to rest. So it's like, when I look at supply and demand, some of it is just like recognition of need. And so I think as more men and women say, wow, this is a space I could operate in. I could have a home that's, laid out and offers kind of refreshing rest to people. I can grow in my skill set. I can become a better listener. I can sit with people in empathy and I can serve them. Like that's a thing. Yeah, it's totally a thing. And it's a thing we're doing all around the world and have been doing for 20 years. And they're independent kind of mom and pop stuff that's all over the place. It's like recognition both of the leader for their need for this kind of an oasis experience and recognition of people to like say, I could serve in that capacity. Yes, absolutely. You could take that multiple years of pastoral business or missions experience and you could sit with a man or woman and literally transform their legacy. Yeah. Like what a gift. I mean, it's an incredible gift. So yeah, I think it's kind of recognition on both ends. I think as we see the viability of this increase, as we see people kind of maybe lay down their pride and say, hey, I do need some help. I recognize my need for not maybe just a Christian counselor, or maybe not just an Airbnb to go sit and stare at the water for a little while, but I see that sacred space, sacred face kind of coming together. Then we'll also see kind of the supply go up as men and women go, I can offer that. I can be that. I have gifts, biblically speaking, there are gifts of hospitality. You've been around people that they're really good at it. Like they're just doing their thing. Yeah. And when you leave, you're like, wow, I really feel well cared for. What's a gift they have? And then you've been around people that have gifts of being able to encourage. Like, when's the last time you were genuinely encouraged? When's the last time a leader was genuinely encouraged, not manipulatively encouraged? Genuinely encouraged, like for just who they are. That's rare. Like they're often encouraged for their abilities, but not encouraged for just who they are as either a son or a daughter of the Most High God. So yeah, I think there's recognition in both ends.
Yeah, no. And I think that encouraging piece, you nailed it too. It's a focused encouragement for the right things. And doing that well.
I mean, you could look at your wife and be like, hey baby, you look great tonight. Okay. That may be true, but sometimes there's manipulation behind that. Hey baby, you look great tonight. You know exactly what I mean. I think sometimes for leaders, there's this encouragement that may come, but it's always got a string attached, or it's always got a request behind it. So to be able to sit in a space where we can just sit together in the presence of the Lord, ask for his encouraging word, and speak those things over people as they're unpacking their life, like it's a beautiful gift.
Huge.
Like I've received that before and just been like blown away by it, like almost to tears in those moments, because it's such a gentle reminder, like there's something else at play here. It's not just the things that I'm good at, the business I can run, or the pastoral thing I can do, or the missions that I can be a part of. It's who I am as a human being. And so out of that overflow, then I can go, be engaged in those other endeavors.
Yeah.
I can go I can run fast because I do, in the words of Eric Little, I feel his pleasure when I run, but I also know who I am as I run.
Yeah. Well, and it's so easy for that to flip flop. I think one, because your calling can change and shift, right? Like you can feel very called to a professional. I mean, we all have a career. We're all doing something, whether it's pastoral ministry or business or whatever. Like you can feel very called to it, but you grow as a human and you learn new things and your eyes open new things. I mean, for me this year, there's been a business issue that we talked about that's been going on a separate business. And I feel like I don't want to say I feel like a completely different person, but I'm like, what my eyes have been open to this year is like, oh, compared to like a year ago. Right. Yeah. And so I think when that's happening, shifts can happen in that. And so sometimes it's not even like, okay, it's like, I don't even need, what am I trying to say? I mean, it's like, you don't even need like encouragement of, hey, good job. You're good at what you do. It's like, you can sit there as a leader and hear, oh, you're crushing it. You can have all the numbers and metrics to crush it. But if realistically some of that other stuff is swirling, it's like, okay, thanks. Yeah. Like next. It's like telling, I think I love sports partially because I love psychoanalyzing and just watching athletes. From a human nature care standpoint, it's like, okay, this was a great athlete. And then they got arrested drunk driving, or a great coach and this happened or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, what's going on in them as a human? Like what pressures were there and how are they not able to handle it? And so
it's almost like their abilities outpace the foundation in their soul. And our world approves abilities. We love the stage. We love the lights. We love the 15 minutes. And if that's what you pursue and you're good at it, your abilities will fast outpace literally the foundation of your heart and soul. And I mean, again, I love sitting with, I especially love sitting with business leader men. And I love sitting with their spouses, because I rarely direct questions to the business leader man, or if it's a woman. I always ask their spouse, and you can just tell it's like the air goes out of the room. Whatever waxy eloquence thing that leader was going to tell me, if it just fades to the distance, and it's like their spouse goes, "Can I trust this guy with what I'm about to say?" Because I see those gifts in my spouse. but man, I really see this, and I fear for it, or I'm missing this in our relationship, or I see the way he or she doesn't interact with the kids at home because they're off attending this. And it's like, okay, what is the legacy I want to leave? Well, I want to leave a legacy literally of, can I do all of that? Well, maybe, but the only way to really even capture it is to just kind of peel back from my action bias and go into a more reflective mode that says, am I accomplishing the very things that I'm setting out to do? Or am I, in the biblical term, losing my soul in the process?
And it's running a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so when when your abilities outpace the foundation of your soul, like we're called for our abilities to grow and scale and get better and run the long haul race and persevere. But if the foundation of your soul doesn't keep I think the abilities can be the easy part. You can go to school for any, I mean, kind of, we all have as long as you're in your lane, but it's like what you're talking about, or I think what you guys are doing is saying like, okay, we need to work on that soul foundation. Like we got to catch that up and we got to maintain it, and we kind of got to keep catching it up. It's not really like it's done. It's an ongoing thing.
It's ongoing. It's seasonal. It moves through seasons. Even as you're saying that, I'm like, I could probably list in my mind the top sprinters in the world. I would struggle to start going after the mile, 2 mile marathon. Unless that was my thing,
we don't celebrate.
I would struggle to give you the names. I celebrate all the super fast for 100 yards kind of people. Like I know them, and that's what we celebrate in this world. So it's like, how can we get to the place where we don't diminish the action that leaders have, because leaders are people of action. We don't diminish that. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's like when action becomes the bias, you miss the reflective side. So you've got to be able to carry both of those things in tension moving forward.
Totally.
And for me, unless you have somebody to help assist in that, you'll run after one or maybe even the other. Maybe you'll go down a laziness kind of
100%
pathway and never fulfill God's plans and purposes for your life. Or maybe you'll run down this ability pathway and burn yourself out long before the real season was to come. That's what I fear. My wife and I saw so many men and women in specifically in pastoral ministry just flame out long before their time. And when you kind of started to unpack the whys and the hows and all this, like you would find some foundational practices that started to kind of leave off because they had to get invited to this meeting, or I can't do that because I got to go speak at this place. And all of a sudden, some of those things started to diminish, but it was like, oh my gosh, you had 30 more years of fruitful type of ministry staring you in the face, and yet you're done. And you're done because I'm done. And you're like, is there a better way to do this? Like, in Proverbs, it says there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. And I always think in my mind, like, I think sometimes the world proposes this way, and it's really a way that ends in some kind of death. Either it's soul death, or it's heart death, or it's family death, or whatever it is. But you achieved the thing, like you made the business, you helped the profits, you made the bottom line work, and you lost everything else. Yeah. And it's like, man, at the end of my life, I don't want that. I don't want that at all.
Right.
I want to be able to say, hey, ask my wife how I'm doing in my 60th, 70th year. Ask my kids how I'm doing as a dad now in their new seasons of life, or as a grandpa. Ask my friends if I'm like a better friend. And then ask me if I'm still engaged in meaningful kingdom calling. Like, ask me those questions. That matters to me. I don't want to just be a flash in the pan. So,
And I think if someone's listening, it's like that list of questions you just asked, like how many people are asking you that regularly? Like, when was the last time you sat down with someone, they asked you, how are you doing as a dad? How are you doing as this? Like, I'm assuming that it's a very small percentage of people that say that's even happening. And it's and that's not because you're like anyone listening, that's not because you're doing anything wrong. That's right. Like the reason we're having this conversation is like, this is just a very missing piece of the puzzle right now that you guys as an organization are like trying to, push forward on. So it's
even in some of that, it's like there's tune-up opportunities. And I'll give you a real life example. 2 or 3 years ago, my wife and I have a great relationship. We have gone through challenges, we've gone through struggles, and we have maintained like this beautiful relationship that has now only grown like exponentially. Like, I love that woman more now than I did 26 years ago. We were invited by a couple to go in and kind of visit their specific oasis. And this one happens to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mark and Pam Taft, who are now, I get to serve, in all kinds of different capacities. We just went in to kind of like check out, like, how's this done? Like, what's the deal? And they asked us, they were like, hey, could we do our marriage like approach on, for you guys? And I honestly, Ryan, my first thought was, I think we're good. Like, we're good.
Yeah,
I don't need that. I don't need that. Like, whatever. And it really felt like the Lord was like, oh my gosh, LaGrange, humble yourself. Good grief. Like, just receive for crying out loud. You're used to giving out, receive. I'm telling you, Ryan, it was transformational. I would put my wife and I's relationship, I'd stack it up against anybody. It was transformational. Just 3 days of being able to sit and intentionally focus on us and have two very gifted, very experienced, very wise couple sit there and walk us through some things. We had some intense moments where I was like, I had no idea that that's how that sounded, right? I had no idea that that's what I was doing in that moment. And so to be able to sit in an environment that felt very safe, that I could be very vulnerable in, that I knew they had our best interests in mind, like it was transformational. My wife and I both walked away from that experience like, oh my gosh, that was so good, so rich. And yet, we would have never been like, oh yeah, sign us up. Like we weren't struggling. We just needed a tune-up. We needed some reminders. We needed godly counsel. So yeah, I was like, I would send anybody there just for a small tune-up. You could be like, I have the greatest relationship in the world. I guarantee there's some things you could work on. And I guarantee there are some things that if in a safe environment, you and or your spouse would be like, hey, it really hurts me when you, whatever that is. Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh, when do I take time? And so when you look at that, like in your relationship with your spouse, when you think about in your relationship with the Lord, when you think about your relationship with your kids, friends and family, all that kind of stuff, it's like we give you opportunity to unpack some things so that you can go out and live that kingdom calling unburdened. Like, let's let you go out unburdened and in full health.
Yeah, totally. 100% on board with that. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm just going to leave it with what you said there. That's good.
Well, think about it this way. I think the reluctance to do that kind of thing, if you're a leader in any way, shape, or form, the minute you raise your hand and you say, hey, I have a problem with whatever the case might be, that may not be the safest place in the world to raise your hand. Yeah. You may be in front of your board. You may be in front of your congregation, your constituency, your business leaders. There's a lot of not safe places. So part of even our acronym with that REST, with that REST, that S in there is a very safe place. And even one of our hosts expanded a little bit. He said, it's safe sanctuary. And when you think about sanctuary in the old biblical times, it was a place you could flee to. You may have been guilty of XYZ. Like you may be wrong, but sanctuary was a safe place that you could come. And, I don't know how it all played out back then in biblical times, but it's like, for us, it's like, we'll help you unpack some of this stuff. Yes, you screwed up. Yes, you made a mistake. Yes, you said the thing that you didn't mean to say, and it was really hurtful. Yeah. Let's help you unpack that, whether that was to someone in your family, whether that's somebody in your organization, whether that was a close friend, it doesn't matter. Let's help you. Let's give you safe sanctuary at that time.
That's cool. Yeah. I want to go on a tangent about the actual like Old Testament version of that, of like the tabernacle and burnt offerings. You couldn't actually go behind the curtain except a little bit. And I was like, actually, that's good to Jesus. There's a whole thing there, but we're going to leave that for another time.
Yeah, we'll leave that for
But you got my brain going for a second. I was like, we can't go there. We don't have time for that. All right, everyone. I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. Well, what if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their kingdom impact investing model, visit impactfoundation.org. So Hospitality has been a piece you've talked about. And so I want to break that out because I think that's a unique piece of rest that, because there's rest, right? And there's purposeful, intentional rest that, you said sacred space, sacred face. And we've talked a lot about the face and how to do that well. We've talked a lot about the individual that needs the rest and why and what's going on, and even some of their objections to it and trying to like get there. We've talked about the style of coaching and how to do that. Hospitality is important, and it's an important piece of that. So when I take my family and we go for an Airbnb weekend, I still got to make meals. I still got to pack everything up. I still got to figure out I just got to figure it all out. As an adult, at least for me as an adult, there are not many times that you get to be a kid again and someone else takes care of you. It just doesn't happen. I know.
My wife likes to say, I like to feed you until you can't breathe.
Yeah. And it could be, I think it's food. I think it's how a place is set up to come into. It's checking in without guilt of that. It's facilitating rest, like, because when we go, like if we go off to Crested Butte for a weekend, I'm like all stressing out like the week before. I'm like looking at maps for mountain bike trips and all this stuff, and it's like if I just had a guide that could do it and take me for, so I don't want to overlook the hospitality piece, because I think a lot of people could listen to this and say like, all right, time to go get rest, and they go get rest. They don't have the hospitality piece. And that's rough. So talk to me about that.
So we actually drive that through as our very first value as an organization. So not only do you have the retreat encouragement, safety, transformation, these are the things that we do. We ascribe to become the best at rest. Like we want to be the best at it. We want to grow in all of those spaces when it refers to the acronym. However, values-wise, attentive hospitality is number one. Now, attentive hospitality means in that space, you are very attentive to everything that's going on. Not overly, not overreaching, but you're attentive. Yeah. Have you ever, as a family that used to have, we used to have a large house in downtown Indianapolis that we would rent out for Airbnbs. We slept in the spaces. We knew what they were like. Like we knew, oh my gosh, we need better darkening curtains there. Oh my gosh, that little Roomba vacuum cleaner's blue light is so bright. We need to put that in another room. Or man, it would be really nice to right on the nightstand have what? So all of our hosts run through attentive hospitality. That's both before the guest comes, and that can even take the form of some questionnaires, some kind of, we internally call it like an intake form. We ask a ton of questions because we want to know what it is that you actually like. I spoke one time at a conference years ago, got off the stage, walked around the back, and there was a guy waiting there for me, and his name was Bob. I still remember his name. And he goes, "Hey, we're gonna take you out to a massage." And I just looked at him. I'm like, "No, I'm good." And he goes, "That's not what your wife said." And I looked at him and I go, "Wait, you talked to my wife?" And he goes, "Oh yeah." And I started to think, wait a minute. When I got to my hotel room, everything that I like was in the welcoming basket. Like I just thought like, oh, this is standard. Like these are the standard things that they give every speaker. Then I started like unpacking and I'm like, wait a minute. There was popcorn, there was Twizzlers, there was, oh my gosh, these were all the things that I actually like. And he's like,
it's like that flashback scene in a movie where everything is like, jun, 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 jun. It's like all the scenes and they're like, oh, it's all.
And I'm like, he goes, and your wife had said you've been struggling in your back. And I know it was a long drive for you to get here. So we just want to bless you with that. And I thought, oh my gosh, how attentive was that? Yeah. And so we've kind of carried that forward into the organization to say, let's be attentive in everything in our intake forms. What is it that you like? Obviously we go through your allergies and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be preparing your food. What is it that you like? What kind of things, you mentioned activities. What are the things you like to do? What actually provides refreshing rest for you specifically? Like, what do you like to do? So not only before they get there, but while they're there, we're attentive to their needs. We're attentive in hospitality. We want to give space. If you need to sleep till 10 o'clock, knock yourself out. We're going to be quiet. You were mentioning some of the physical configurations of your house and needing to be quiet at certain times. It's
I know, yeah.
All of our hosts, they know that. It's almost like it's almost monastic sometimes when you enter into one of these spaces because they are being quiet. They're being very attentive to their guests while their guests are there. So the hospitality side of things, it's like just being attentive. I think it also, even for us, goes a little bit further. And this is, for the Christian segment of your population, we try to be attentive to the Holy Spirit. I'll give you an example. We had a guest here once. He was coming in from a long run at stuff, and he just needed some space and time. I had been driving my own self crazy. I'd had to drive 3 hours away from where I'd had an event. I get back to my house. My wife had already taken care of everything. Everything looks great. It's like, things are in place, and we're going to receive this guest. And I just felt like in that moment, like, wait a minute, what? I wonder what this guy might need. And I literally felt like, and again, we can theologically unpack all that, but it's like, I felt like I need to go to my library and look at a couple of my books. Well, we have 1 million books down in we call it an oasis, down in our oasis space. There's 1 million books down there. And I felt like, wait, in my office, so I just grabbed a few books. I put them down in a space, and I laid one specific book that I had A, never read, and B, didn't even know that I owned. And I just put it right there on the nightstand. So I had to go pick him up from the airport in Atlanta. We got back here late. He retired. He came up for breakfast the next morning. He goes, "You guys aren't going to believe this." He's like, "I knew I was going to come here, and I knew I needed to downshift really well." And he goes, I struggled to do that. So I've been consciously trying to downshift, disengaging from work as I was coming into this space. And he goes, "I've been singing this old song." And this guy was in his 60s, singing this old song. And he goes through this old song. And I don't even know the song because I didn't grow up in that kind of a context. And my wife's kind of nodding along. And he goes, "You know the name of the song?" And I'm like, "I have no idea." And he's like, "He restoreth my soul." And I was like, "Oh." He goes, "The book beside my bed is called He Restoreth My Soul." He was just freaked out. And I'm like, that is so cool. Like, that is part of our attentiveness to hospitality. Attentive literally to the voice of the Holy Spirit in our hospitality as we welcome guests in. So it's kind of like both in the practical and in the ethereal.
Yeah. And that the level of intentionality to both process and think about that as a host, mixed with actually do something about it as a host, mixed with actually follow through on it, that takes a lot of bandwidth. Like, let's just say for your hosts, like this isn't something, you can't half-ass this.
No, you can't.
Like,
you cannot.
Because if this is a side, and I don't want to say that as like a side hustle, but I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, if this was a side hustle thing and everything else was still going on, I'm gonna do one of those few things I just mentioned really well. I'm gonna be like driving around a mountain bike ride and be like, you know what, that dude needs that book on the bedside table. And then I'm never gonna get around to ordering it on Amazon or putting it down there. And it's like, and then when I talk to him, I'll have thought about it. It'll still be impactful, but not quite to the degree you're saying. Like, and so I just want to say that in a sense of like what you're talking about doing, that is hard work in a beautiful way.
Well, we recognize that it's hard work. And as a result, we literally have a full-time staff care guy. We have a guy who takes care of our staff, because we look at this as like refreshing the refreshers, taking care of those who typically take care of others. So our staff care guy he comes to us from a great missions organization, and he is just so attentive to the needs of our hosts as they are attentive to our guests. So it just kind of backfills itself. But it does take, I've been in environments where people were so attentive that I immediately eased myself into, we like to say that hospitality opens up the heart. Like, when you think of in the Benedictine traditions, we welcome others as we would welcome Christ. It's like, if I knew that Jesus was going to show up at my house, there's probably some things that I would do. You don't want to get overly crazy, and this is not legalistic and getting perfect and all that kind of stuff. But I would actually prepare for him to be there. Like, you've all gone into places where you look and you're like, did you not know we were coming? Was that not today that we were doing that? And like,
totally,
it just diminishes the value.
And unfortunately, I think that I'm going to take a shot at it, and I love it. But the capital C church like struggles with that. Like,
we do.
There was a church we were trying out over a few months, and one elder invited us to his house for lunch 3 different times, said he'd follow up all 3 times, never did. I was like, okay, like, that's fine that you got part of it right. But like, and I didn't need that. I wasn't like, oh, my faith is in crisis but I think someone could be in that spot where they're like, that's the way the church has hurt them, or that's what they need. And then it actually does more damage. And so I think like there's a responsibility there with that too, to be like, nope, we got to do this well, and we got to follow through and do that.
Well, we also watch that attentive hospitality, especially for a leader, someone who's used to giving. And I say this with all tenderness, most leaders are not great at receiving. Yeah. Most leaders are used to being on the side of the table that is giving, whether that's you're a high level leader and you're used to giving orders, or you're used to giving direction, or used to giving finances, or used to giving wisdom, whatever the case might be. When you do hospitality and you do it really attentively, you put people in a position to receive, and all of a sudden their heart is just wide open to whatever might happen in those next ensuing days. So it's like when they realize, man, this couple, or we have a couple of singles that are out there in the international space. When this host has really thought this through, like, oh my gosh, they knew I was coming. They're attentive to my needs. They provided an incredible atmosphere. I'm ready. Like my heart is already wide open to whatever questions might be asked, to whatever depths we might plunge. It's like, it's just different when you show up and people are like, oh yeah, that was today. Hey, yeah, just have a seat. We'll be ready for you here in a minute. Oh, I feel like I'm in a doctor's office. Great.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, it just feels different. You knock a leader's equilibrium off whenever you give them the opportunity to receive.
Yeah, totally. It's awesome. Okay. There's two more things, maybe three, that I want to talk about here. So downshifting. I love that word. You said that. So I listened to a podcast a couple of years ago. He's, I forget the dude's name. I think it was actually on the Tim Ferriss podcast, which I'm not always a fan of, but every once in a while it's awesome and I'm on board with it. And so, there's this venture capital guy that's been in like that space his whole career. And he was talking about his rest rhythms. And so like once a quarter, him and his wife take a Saturday to a Sunday, like Saturday through the whole week to Sunday. And it's like they do that 4 times a year. One time they go somewhere like exotic, one time they do a staycation. The other time they do like a quick kind of getaway, and so they've got a rhythm, and it was like really awesome to listen to. So downshifting is important. Like I know for me, it takes me 2 to 4 days to come off of it. It's almost like a drug. And I don't mean that in a way like, oh, he said drug, he's addicted. No, it's like, if it's high performing, there's chemicals moving in your body, and there's your brain's moving and stuff. And so you can't, I just want to talk. And part of the reason I want to do this, I guess I should set this up in the sense of my hunch is most people listening can't call you tomorrow, and
although they could.
They might, well, I mean, they could, but they might have kids.
I know what you mean.
Let's say I finish this podcast. I'm like, this is what I need. Yep. I got a baby coming the next week or two. I'm not coming in the next few weeks to do this. Right. And so I want to make this I want to, even though people can't get the full experience, maybe I want to give people some practical things they could maybe do to get somewhat of that experience, and then know what all that could be. So as it relates to downshifting, you can't go and say, wow, man, Ryan, Nathan, you guys convicted me. We need this. My wife and I are taking 3 days right now, and that's it. Because by the time you check out on the 3rd day at 10 a.m. and you've packed up, you're donezo. Like that's the moment you started to actually rest, and you already put the stress back on.
Yeah, so you're spot on.
Talk to me about how you guys maybe take it as someone who's going to do this with you guys. How do you coach them to downshift, both in terms of tasks practically and mentally and all that kind of stuff?
So that is a fantastic insight, because if you think about your car, if you jump from 5th to 1st, you're going to throw your engine. Like it just is what it is. And I think I watch a lot of guys and gals get to the point of like, I'm going to go on vacation. So they just cram everything under the sun on that last day, or I'm going to go disengage and I'm just going to throw everything that I should have done this last month into this last day. Yeah. And then I'm going to go, and for the first 3 days, here's what physiologically often happens. You often get sick. Like you literally get physically sick, because you have shut things down so fast that your body's like, I don't know what we're doing. I think I'll just give you a fever. Let's just put you in a fever and lay you in bed.
It's so
and
real.
I've heard so many people that are like, we had this big vacation planned and I was sick for the first 3 days of it. Well, of course you were, because you were just running yourself ragged before it. So I think when it comes to downshifting, everything has to be very intentional. I think there are rhythms that you can do practically in your daily life that can help you in those moments. We coach people even as they go into sabbaticals. because, sabbatical is kind of an idea that's time has come in a lot of ways. But it's like we coach people as they go into sabbaticals to literally downshift. Like we have month, like here's 3 months out, here's 2 months out, here's 1 month out, now you're in sabbatical mode, you're actually in first gear and you're good to go. Like it's good. But one of the things that I always encourage people when it comes to downshifting, and it sounds so stupid and practical and cliche, tell me about your sleep. Tell me about your sleep patterns. And I was of the ilk years ago that was like, oh, 5 hours is all I need. I'm just going to go and go and go and go and go. Well, scientifically, that's moronic. Like it's just moronic. And I know there's some listeners who could be like, well, I'm designed different and I can go. Yeah, great. You buck the system as far as science goes. Great on you. Your body needs 8 hours of sleep and you need to be like really intentional about it. And I know there's a lot of apps and a lot of different things that can, map your circadian rhythms and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I know we all have a million things to do, but the minute that you can realize downshifting, a part of that is just responding to my body's need to rest sleep-wise. So we look at people and say, okay, downshifting requires rest first and foremost, and that comes practically through sleep. For me, that's like go to bed a little earlier. I love to get up early. I'm one of those weirdos that loves to get up stupid early because between like 5 and 7, nobody bothers me because nobody's awake. So that's the kind of thing that I love to do. That involves me going to bed intentionally early. And I know people have situations, either with young kids or responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. But like try to really frame your day where you get that 8 hours. And I would go even further to say this, and I know I'm no authority, but I give you permission to sleep for 8 hours. Some people just need permission.
Yeah, totally. Like what? But that's like 2 hours of wasted time, like I can function on 6 and that's,
I feel so unproductive or whatever it is. It's like, you can study the science for yourself as I have, and you can come to the same conclusions that the scientists have come to that your body needs 8 hours of sleep. Is that always going to happen? Probably not, but we start there. So rest for us is number one. That's physically for sleep. Number two, and this again is both for our Christian audience and maybe those that are even exploring those things. We look at repentance. When it comes to downshifting into a moment, what are the things that you're carrying around that you don't need to be carrying around right now? Maybe that's just something that you've done that maybe you feel like has offended God and you haven't spent time in deep repentance of that. Maybe that's something that you said to your spouse that you're like, man, I need to go and ask for forgiveness for whatever that was. Maybe it was a situation at work. Whatever that looks like begin by unburdening your heart. That helps you like downshift into a moment. So rest being number one, and it's number one for a reason, because I realized if you do repentance first, like some people would be like, that would be the first thing. No. When you do repentance first and you're tired, it just sounds angry. Like try asking forgiveness for your wife, like whenever you're tired. Honey, I'm sorry. Okay, well, that was really heartfelt. Good stuff. That's awesome. That now totally. Now you have another situation you have to ask for forgiveness for. So it's like rest first, look at repentance, whether in your relationship with God or with others, whatever the case might be. And then third for us, it's like look at restoring biblical rhythms like right now. Like you mentioned, even I think you said something about Sabbath or whatever. It's like Sabbath was a beautiful gift given to us. And it literally is a gift to kind of shut the whole thing down for a bit. And some people are like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine taking a whole day off. Well, great. Start with like a half a day or a quarter of a day.
Totally.
Start with something like mark that thing out, block it on your calendar if you need to. Tell your loved ones or engage even in that restoring of a biblical rhythm with them. And it's like rest, repentance, restoring biblical rhythms. What are the things that I need to do right now that will help me in this life? So we do those first cool. 3 things first. There's an additional 3, and I'll just gloss over them real quick, because I think when most business leaders and most creatives do like a meeting, like a creative meeting, they actually do these last 3 things first, but their people are dying for the first 3. So you and I both go into creative board meetings and creative things or whatever. And it's like, we're all going to meet together and we're going to reimagine this whole thing and it's going to be incredible. And it's like, people are dragging their legs coming in and they're like, got unresolved issues in their life with their family. And they're like, oh my gosh, I haven't taken a day off in 7 years. So it's like, oh yeah, let's spark creativity from that. No. Let's do rest, repentance, restoring biblical rhythms. Then we move down into like rediscovery. After you've done those things, let's talk about rediscovery. Like, take me back to like when you were first engaged in the thing that you're engaged in right now. Take me back, I know in your story, like take me back to that time when leaving Red Bull and you're like, in this mindset of like, I don't know if I'm going to go with OM. I don't know what I'm going to go do. Like you were rediscovering some things back there, like some passions begin to fuel up inside of your heart. Take me back to that moment. Take me back to that ridiculous song, whether it's, something, in your punk rock, aggressive that you loved back then, or, something for others of this worship tune or whatever.
Totally.
Take me back there. Let's rediscover the moment. And then let's like start to reimagine life around some of the things you've rediscovered. And for us, it's like, how can you now then enter into this moment of just you've sorted through some beautiful things. Now you can be fully present in this moment. Some things have already begun to stir, like, wow, I remember back then, like you're already in that mode and mindset.
Yeah.
I say all that because not only is it helpful going into a moment, it's helpful during the moment, and it's helpful, and we say sometimes the last one, re-entry. It's helpful as you go out of one of those moments and re-engage in life. I find you can do these things literally every day. Like you can run through that grid in your mind. Did I get it? Did I get a good amount of sleep? Are the relationships I have with both God and man, like, are they on the up and up, or is there like, oh man, there's that one text I need to send that will probably turn into a phone call that might turn into a face-to-face. I need to do that. Like it's hanging over my head. Like you can run through those things on a daily basis. So I think for me, like that has helped my heart and soul downshift because it's sometimes helped to unclutter my mind in a lot of different ways. So yeah, there you have it. That was a lot. Sorry. That was like 10 minutes.
No, that's good. No, I'm honestly was just listening. I was like, yep, I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. I could see this person doing that. That person. So I think 100% on board. I think the rediscovery, reimagine kind of thing, I think is really important because you got to give yourself space for stuff to just hit you. Like when you don't have white space.
Yes.
In white space, like I can go on a mountain bike ride and have white space, but my brain is like spinning so fast and everything else that I really don't have any room for anything to happen to me, but if I can go on a ride and, or just have a week where it's like, and this is the beauty of going on a vacation. Sometimes it's like when the other stuff isn't hitting you as fast, like you can you're like, oh, that's interesting. I do remember that was why I did that. Yeah. And this is how that's changed. Like, well, rediscovering like, oh, this is how that would implement. And I think that can be really cool. Yeah. I think we should be doing that regularly, and it's really, really challenging and hard to do it.
That reflection, it's the action bias versus reflection bias. It's like, it runs the reflective side because I go back and I start to remember, oh, that was seasonal or whatever the case might be. I think when you say margin, I know for me, literally like when you read a book, a physical book, there's margins on the pages. Like if all the words ran off to all the margins, it would be absolutely impossible to read. Like, duh.
Totally.
So I look at a leader's life and I'm like, you are running far past the edges, and you wonder why people are having a hard time reading you, or worse yet, why you're having a hard time reading yourself. You're not even in tune with your own self anymore. Like it's just because stuff is everywhere. So I would encourage a lot of your listeners, like, don't ever take anything that we're even saying in a shame-based way. Take it as an encouragement. Like this is doable. It's possible. There's a life that you're like called to live at a pace that you were designed to live into. Yeah. And totally. I don't think the culture is going to affirm that as much. No. But it's like, when's the last time that I cared about what the culture was affirming? Let me live out of this biblical theological root that says Jesus often withdrew to lonely places. I used to love to ask students, hey, what's the Greek for often? Go look that up. Like, let's look at it. They're all in their, their lexicons and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's like, you know what the Greek word for often is? Often. That's what it says. It's often. So
that can't be right.
If Jesus himself had rhythms of often withdrawing, why would I ever feel shame in saying, I, as a human being, man, I need to peel away. Yeah. And if I can peel away at an Airbnb, maybe that's what I need. If I can peel away at a Christian counselor, maybe that's what I need. But if I can peel away at the combination of both in an oasis setting for a couple of days and just unpack, it's a life changer.
Yeah. Oh, it's super cool. Super cool. Well, we could keep this conversation going on forever. Yeah. And maybe there needs to be a part 2. We'll check back in when you guys rebrand and you can dive into some other stuff, but love it, man. Nathan, I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate, not just the heart, because I think we're aligned in heart, and we realized that when we first started talking and method, but you guys have put some like words to things, and you even had a few phrases on this where I was like, oh, that's a great way of saying that. And so I think one of the things that's special about you guys and your ability to articulate this is, I could probably, we can have that rhetoric, but there's some one-liners and things that just rediscover, reimagine, rest,
Yeah.
the acronym. You guys have put some work in to articulate this stuff. And I think that can go a long way. And so thank you for that. I think it's really helpful.
Absolutely.
And I hope people hear it and just experience. I mean, even if it's as simple as like this weekend, after people listening, like it's a 2-hour break they take in some way like that.
Yeah.
Isn't that such an awesome win for any of us to do that on any given day? And so hopeful outcome.
Yeah. It's a gift to yourself. And I think if you're in leadership, especially in the Christian sphere, there's been a lot of like, love God, love others. Okay, that's theologically incorrect because you lost yourself in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more I think you can regain space and time to be able to reconnect with yourself in certain ways, reconnect with God, you can actually love people better. I'm a better human being. It's the Snickers commercials with Betty White, you're not you when you're hungry. It's like, you're not you when you're tired.
Totally.
So stop trying to lead out of tiredness, lead out of a space of refreshing rest and watch your legacy transform.
Man, love it. It's huge. It's huge. Well, man, thanks for being on. Hope we can do this again. I hope how do people find you guys like right now? And we'll have to update the linkage and stuff, but
yeah, for the foreseeable future, you can find us at lifeimpact.care, lifeimpact.care. That's the space that we live in. There's a video out there on YouTube too, that kind of gives a big overall, but all of our resources and all of our oasis that are scattered around the world are housed right there on that site.
Awesome, man. Well, cool. Well, thanks for being on, and we'll keep in touch.
Love it. Thanks, man.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.